Hi, my name is Derek Su, Executive Coding Officer for KITE, and welcome back to the free KITE Python course. Here on KITE, we are on a mission to spread knowledge of new technologies across the world. Today, we will learn about string methods.
Well, what are string methods? To answer that question, we must know that a string is a Python object, which contains data, in this case, the words and characters, and methods. And methods are specific functions associated with the object. In this case, whenever we create a variable that is a string, that variable becomes a string object. And because it is a string object, they are predefined functions that can be used specifically on that string object. And there are many of these functions, and these functions are all the same for all strings. In order to see these functions, we can use the dir function to see all the available methods of a certain object. So let's look at how we can use the dir function using the text editor. So first, I'm just going to create a variable called word, and it's going to contain a string. And let's say that I know I've created a string object here, but what I don't know is what methods I can use with it. So that's why I'll call the dir function, sending in that variable slash string object as an argument. And if I run it, it'll show me all the possible methods that I can use with this particular object. And in this case, it's a string object. So these are all string methods. Well, that's nice. Now I can see all the methods that I can use. But what if I don't know what some of them mean? For example, let's say I don't know what encode means, which is right here. I know that's a method. I just don't know how I would use it. So that's where we call the help function. The help function tells us what methods do. So in this case, I'm going to do str.encode, and I write str because encode is a string method. And if I run it now, it should explain what str.encode does. Similarly, I can do something with other methods. So it doesn't have to be encode. It can be any string method or any method for any object for that matter. We just have to change the initial prefix. But staying with string methods, let's say I don't know what lstrip is. I'll run it, and now it'll describe what lstrip does. So we already went over the help function, so let's focus on the syntax of methods. We already saw a little sneak peek of syntax when I did the str dot, but let's do it more in depth here. So because methods are functions specifically associated with a particular object, in this case we're talking about string objects, we have to call a method by writing the name of the object, in this example would be word, followed by a dot, and then writing the name of the method. And note that in this example, we do word.upper, and it is not upper.word because if we put the word as an argument, that will suggest that upper is just a general function and not a specific method associated with an object. So replicating the example in the slides, if you wanted to convert a string into all capital, we would have to call the object, in this case, word is the object, followed by a dot, and then call the method itself. And in this case, the method is upper. And I'm just going to print the result. So this should return banana in all capital. And note that we cannot call it like this, where upper is a function and word is an argument, because upper is a method. And this syntax would suggest that upper is just a general function. So if we try to run it, it's not going to work. So even though we already discussed that we cannot send an object as a parameter of a method, and rather we have to call a method by writing the name of the object, and then a dot, and then the name of the method, some methods still take parameters. And in this example, in order to know what the method find should look for, we pass an argument to tell it that, hey, we should look for the letter A, and that's what it does. So let's look at this example in the text editor. So here I have a few methods that we're going to look at, And first, let's just start with the find method, which is what we went over just in that last slide. So I'm going to create a variable called word, and let's say it contains banana. Now remember that word, in addition to being a variable, is also a string object because it contains a string. So that means I can use string methods on it. So I'm going to take the string object, and I'm going to call the find method. And what the find method does is that it'll return the index of whatever character or phrase that you want to look for. So in this case, let's try to find the letter A. Well, in banana, the letter A occurs at index 1. So that means this function will return 1, which you can see here. And note that it'll ignore all later instances. Once it finds the first instance, it'll just return that immediately. But let's say you wanted to consider these other instances, and you wanted to ignore the first two letters. Well, in that case, you would have to send a second argument of 2, and this means that the program will start looking for the letter A beginning at index 2, and it'll ignore everything before that. So starting at index 2, that means we'll locate this A instead, which occurs at index 3, which you can see here. And remember that we don't have to just do single letters. For example, if we wanted to find the phrase nan, which would be here, we would get an index of 2 as a result, because this phrase begins at index 2, which is here. So that's basically the find method. So moving on, next we have strip. So let's see what that does. So if we make another variable, let's just keep it banana. But let's say there's a bunch of spaces around it. So like this. What the strip method will do is that it'll remove all empty space around the word. So if we strip this variable word, or the string object word, we should just get banana without all the spaces. Moving on to the third function, or the third method, we have the method starts with. So let's say we have a string, and let's say it says hello world. What starts with will do is that it will return true or false based on the argument that you give it. So let's call the starts with method, and let's send h as a argument. And what this will do is that it will check, does this string object start with the letter H? In this case, it does, so it should return true, which you can see here. You can also check for multiple letters, so you can check if it starts with hello. And in this case, it also starts with a hello, so this should also return true. However, if we change it to a character that it doesn't start with, for example, like lowercase h, it'll return false. And lastly, we have str.lower. And I'm going to keep the same phrase, hello world. And what str.lower does is that it'll return the same phrase, but everything in lowercase. So this should return hello world, but the H and the W will be lowercase letters, which you can see here. Another interesting thing that you can do with methods is you can chain them. So if you remember, if we call the starts with method and send lowercase h as a parameter, we would get false, because this phrase starts with a capital H. But if we were to call the lower method first, we can separate these two methods with a dot. And what this will do is at first, it'll put the string object into all lowercase because of the lower method. And then next, it'll call the starts with method, checking for lowercase h. In this case, it will start with lowercase h because the lower method would have converted everything into all lowercase. So if we run it now it'll become true. Here are the string methods that we just went over in the text editor. And if you're curious about exploring more string methods, you can visit this link here.